Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is your girl, Keita, founder and host of Becoming a Better You podcast and the Bryson Harmon Foundation. I'm so excited to see y'all. I cannot believe we are on episode 8. Like, every time I prepare myself for a new episode, I'm like, oh my God, like, what once was just a thought in my head, like, we're literally doing it and we're staying consistent and doing it every week. And I really appreciate everyone who is following, liking, and sharing. If you are new here, let me go ahead and give you that information so you could be caught up. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at the Bryson Harmon Foundation. You should see that scrolling below. And if you just want to know a little bit more about my personality, you can follow me on TikTok at Keita_TBHF podcast. There, I do a lot of different things. It's not always just about mental health. So that's a good place to follow me if you just want to get to know me a little bit more personally. Also, we are Amazon influencers now. So that bio is also, the link to that is also in the bio on TikTok. Also, we do the creator fund on TikTok. So there are reviews for products from TikTok Shop and Amazon also available on their TikTok. Also, if you would like to be a blessing, if you just want to sow into me, if you say, girl, I really like you and God told me to sing you something, I want to bless you, you can do so on Cash App at Pretty Girls Worship. It's scrolling below. And I thank you kindly. Also, if you want to be a part of the podcast, maybe you have some questions, maybe you want to be interviewed, maybe you have a story. There's no story too small, too big, to anything that we cannot discuss. This is a safe space. So if you want to be a part, you can contact us at the Bryson Harmon Foundation at gmail.com and we will respond as soon as we can. If you just have questions also about something that you've seen in a previous episode and you just kind of want a clarification or you need a little bit of advice or you want us to ask a question on the podcast, this is the place to do it. Okay. Now that we get all of that out the way, I do got some announcements about what's to come, but we're going to get to that later. So today's episode is about fatherlessness. I know it's going to be in multiple parts because it's such a large portion of my life and my mental health and my healing journey. So we're not going to try to jam everything up into one episode. So this episode, we're just going to go from the beginning. Like there's no way to start but from the beginning. I think I've expressed a few times on the podcast how when Bryson died, it awakened like a lot of things that I had never dealt with previously, such as low self-esteem, rejection, daddy issues, all of these things that I had learned to internalize and just push down. That grief period was forcing me to deal with some things. Okay, so area I feel like I have come to a great place in my healing journey, and we'll get to how I found out that I was good on that. But let's start with the beginning. Okay, so you asked me, like, Keita, we know you churchy and everything, but like, how did that get started? So I was born to an apostolic household. If you don't know what apostolic is, just Google it. It's gonna pop up sanctified. Yes, the long skirts, the church 4 days a week. Okay, we was in them. That's me, baptizing in Jesus' name. Okay. So I lived in a house with my grandmother, my grandfather. My grandmother was an evangelist. My grandfather was a deacon. My mother was the minister of music. She was over the choirs. She also assisted the pastor with a lot of things. And my uncles, one was the sound man, the other one was the drummer. Like that's just the life that I lived. I didn't really know anything else outside of church. And I really felt like everybody did what we did. Like, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of other things. Okay. So, and y'all excuse me if the mic picks up any excess noise because y'all know it's summer break and all my kids are at home and the toddler he owns something. Okay. So, my mother and my father were married when they conceived me. And by the time I turned 3, they were separated. So I do not recall a time that I have ever lived with both my mom and my dad. Now, if it happened, I just wasn't old enough to remember it. My earliest memories are from living in what my family called the big house on Ray Street. And if anybody knew us, you know exactly what house I'm talking about. So, I feel like I was like any other little girl who wanted their father's love and affection. I remember times they divorced when I was 7, but I remember prior to that he would come to the church sometimes and just like sit in the back, and I would literally turn around. Somebody would tell me he was here, and I would jet to the back to like hug him and all of this stuff. I I mean, I don't think that that was abnormal. I think that that was just the innocence and the love of a child is just, that's my dad. I don't, a lot of different people had different opinions about him because later on we would find out that his lifestyle was a little sketchy. But at that time, are you talking about Keita at 5 and 6? Did not know that. Of course, I was loved in my home. My granddaddy and my grandma spoiled me rotten. But there came a time in my adulthood, even when I looked back on how spoiled I was because I was their only grandchild for 17 years. Why wasn't that enough to feel the absence of my father? And a lot of times what we forget is you could be loved by everybody, but it's that one person that's supposed to love you, that's supposed to be there. Once they reject you, nothing else can feel that. So when we get to around like age 7, 8, this is where I started noticing like, okay, he never comes and sees me at the house. He doesn't call. I only see him every now and again when he pops up at the church, or if he does call, the conversation goes towards my mom and what she's doing. It's never really about me per se. So I started to feel a little way towards him, like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, why you don't love me? Like, what person marries somebody, and even when y'all get divorced, you still had a child with that person. As far as my knowledge was at that time, was his only child, his firstborn. You know, why be so distant? Why not really try to be apart? I can remember times when, and around this age is when the promises started of coming to pick me up and then never showing up. I would sit on the porch for hours. Day would turn into night until eventually, like, my grandma or my mom would just be like, come on, come inside, just promises that you were going to pay for this for school or do that. And he would not come through. The other hurtful part of my childhood experiences with him was that he was also a preacher. Now, before y'all start going on the preachers is, preachers ain't no good and all this other stuff, that is not everybody's story. There are good and there are bad of everything in this life. So, the way our church system was set up, we would go and visit other churches. We had like a group of churches that we fellowshipped all the time. That just means like our church would go visit their church and have a service, and vice versa. They would come to ours. And so when we would go to these other churches in that circle, he would be there. And it would be 6 months since I seen him or heard from him, but he would be there in their pulpit, like nothing's happened, laughing, joking. And I would be really confused as to how come I'm not able to get in touch with you, but somehow these other people are able to get in touch with you to come preach at their church or just come be there. When he would see me, he would do, get up if he had to have words and say, "Oh, my beautiful daughter," or whatever, and put $20 in my hand and then disappear again. My mother at this time never bad mouth him. And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you'll start feeling a certain way because the mom is bad mouthing him." My grandmother was a stickler on the word. Like whatever the Bible says, that's what's right. Okay. So she would always reiterate, the Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. So she would never bad mouth him or tell me to stop talking to him. And so neither did my mom. The feelings that I started to get was because I started noticing things that I was like, okay, I don't see my other cousins' dads doing them like this, or, not being there, not going to school functions. My grandfather was well in his 50s, late 50s, early 60s when I was born, and he's the one taking me back and forth to school and, playing with me outside. Like that wasn't his job. That wasn't what he was supposed to do. I have a father, And so this went on for a couple of years of him just disappearing and not hearing from him, or promising he was coming but not coming, and then just popping up somewhere. And I wouldn't even know he was going to be there. And I started to have like a little resentment towards him. Like, you can travel anywhere, but you can't travel to the same house we've been living at forever. I think the pivotal point where my confusion turned into outright anger and hatred, and I'm going to use the word hatred because we're talking about my emotions at that time, came from one Christmas. I think I was about 10 years old. My mom, she always used to go all out for Christmas. I mean, I was her only child, so I was spoiled rotten, y'all. I'm telling y'all, like, the more stories y'all hear about my childhood, y'all gonna be like, "Oh my God, girl!" Like, but she would go all out. My mama worked hard. She worked long hours to make sure that I had whatever I wanted and needed. So this one Christmas, we were having fun. He called and said that he wanted to come and see me. This is after maybe me not seeing him for about a year. And so my mom was like, that's fine. He said he had some Christmas gifts for me. And she was like, okay, that's fine. He actually does show up. And for a second there, I was like, oh, like maybe, he's starting to feel convicted. And this is a change in this pattern. Like maybe things are going to get better, because this is one time that I can really say he said he was coming and he actually showed up. And so I see him get out the car with these big black garbage bags. Like, y'all know those heavy duty bags. Not my 10-year-old brain is like, this is gonna be some good gifts. Like, this is a big old bag. What kind of gift would you need to have in a heavy duty black garbage bag? He comes in the house and, my grandma speaks to him. Everybody speaks to him. He sits down on the couch and I start dumping the stuff out the bag. Instantly, as the stuff started to exit the bag, I realized that there's a smell, like a smell of like a building was on fire or something like that. It was a very heavy smoke and fire smell. And as we started going through the toys, none of them were packaged, so they weren't new toys. A lot of them were broken or were slightly burnt or something like that. The rage, because I was never raised to be a person that just gimme, 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 gimme. Like, my mom raised me to be grateful for all things. When she would do stuff, even, she would do stuff and I knew like I really didn't deserve to get this new pair of shoes or whatever the case may be, because I had been being bad or whatever. Like I would be, I would wear those shoes to death. Like I think that's where my kids get it from, because I could buy them something, they can have 8 pairs of shoes. That first pair that I bought, they gonna wear it to death. So it wasn't about the fact that, it wasn't a specific toy that I wanted, or a brand new toy, because my uncles, they took care of that. I had computers and everything else. Like it was the fact that there was no thought put into it, and that these toys obviously came from like a dumpster or a thrift shop after a building had burned down. Like you didn't clean them, you didn't do anything. You just got them in a garbage bag and gave them to me. And that moment, that day was the day I said, I hate my dad. And it was the first time that I ever seen my grandmother really be upset at him. She didn't go off, but she went upstairs and all she kept saying was Jesus, Jesus. Like my grandma, I'm telling y'all, she was saved to the bone. God rest her soul. And so my mother was like, okay, you gotta go, because it's also fed up to the point of every time I try to do the right thing and allow you to come see her or allow you to talk to her on the phone, you seem to make her cry or hurt her feelings by not showing up or disappointing her. And then I have to be the one that picks the pieces up afterwards, And so after that point, I don't hear or talk to my father again until I am about 16. In that span of time, from 7 up until that moment, or 5 up until that moment, I remember always, it was like I was never reminded that he was not there until I would run across a situation that required him to be there. So like in our church that I grew up in, it was family oriented. My cousin was the bishop, and he loved children. He still does to this day. Like I remember times he would pick up me and my cousin and which is his daughter, and put us on his lap and do the thing like from the Bill Cosby episode where he's shaking his lap so we can bounce up. He would hug us after service. I don't care how many people were in line to talk to him or have conferences with him. He always made time for the kids. That was important to him. And so even though he loved on me, and even in my adult years, I've always been able to call him and he was fine. Some of the roughest times when I was going through with Bryson, he was there. It just reminded me that she's enjoying this because this is her father. This is what she gets all the time. Mines are only this moment on Sundays or at service time that I could receive this type of love, fatherly love. I don't know why it never clicked to me that my granddaddy was technically fatherly love. My uncles were not spend time with you type of people. They just would buy me stuff. Like that was it. And they would buy me boys' toys like computers, games, every gaming system you could think of, they bought it. So I don't know why I associated him so much with the father figure. Maybe because he was the pastor of the church and he was the leader. He was the person that everybody goes to, like a spiritual father. And so I just interpreted that as what I needed. And also him being my cousin's father also played a role in seeing how they interacted with each other, and wishing that I had that on a daily basis. Of course, people who were friends with him would come by the church and they would all be like, "Hey, you heard from your dad?" And instantly I would get emotional because no, I haven't in a year or a year and a half, and he wouldn't know how old I was even when he called, and I would start busting out crying to the point where my mom just had to say, like, no, stop asking her, like, stop bringing him up, because it upsets her that you will tell her that you talk to him every day, and this is his daughter who he won't even call to see how her day is going. Um, so that space of time, it was like a buildup of things. It wasn't like a person, and I say this about my children even now because they also deal with fatherlessness. It never was like they woke up and was like, I can't stand my dad, or, I'm angry with my dad. A lot of things are a build up of things, and children will always try to give you like a grace. They can always quickly forgive until they get to a point where they cannot. Now it is a resentment thing because, wait a minute, you don't really want me. And to people who know my dad, some of them have different opinions. They feel like, oh, well, he really do love you, but they didn't live or experience what I experienced with him. It's hard when you on the outside looking in because you only get one side. It had even come to the point where my family church, where they would be like, okay, you got to stop doing this to this little girl. Like it was starting to become noticeable that you meant, I don't know if it was intentionally, but it was doing more harm than good. Um, so where people, when he would come around, people would, open them with open arms. Okay, so what, they got divorced, but that's Keita's dad. It started to become where they was like, you a crook, you're a horrible person. Like, we would have never thought that you would be the type of person that you are. I kind of wish that in that space, in that childhood space, that early age of 5 to 10, that my uncles would have stepped in a little bit more, or because we know what the outcome is. Like, there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm not the first person to grow up with a dad that is absent, and I won't be the last. But there are things that I have experienced in doing so that I can see in my own children as they experience it. So we have open dialogue because I'm trying to avoid them going down certain paths just because of that. And I feel like that should have been talked about more. And it's not to put the blame on anybody, but I do believe, I'm a strong believer in that open dialogue and having these conversations in the meat of it will stop a lot of this having to go back and revisit when you're 30, when you're 36. More about that beginning part of my dad is I never had a relationship with his family either. That is something that my children do experience that I don't. Even though their father is absent, they still have a relationship with his people. So whereas and he wouldn't come get them, his aunts would. In my case, I hadn't. My mother says I did meet my grandmother as a baby, my fraternal grandmother, but never as like a child. I hadn't met his family. Um, it wasn't like they would call or be like, "Oh, this is TT so and so," just checking on your niece. Not family. Everybody that is in my life and has been in my life from day one all comes from my mother's side. So any family that I talk about is always from there. I also didn't know at the time that he was gaining a reputation amongst the churches, not just in things that had to do with me, but this is starting to open up what really happened between him and my mom and why they ended up getting divorced. We're going to talk about that in part 2 because we're going to get off into what happened once that had already clicked in my head that I hated this man. And being rejected by somebody that is supposed to naturally have this love and affection for you, that is something that triggered me having low self-esteem, because prior to that, I didn't even know what that was. Like, everybody loved me. Like, you know, I was the first grandbaby. I was my mama's first baby, her one and only child that she ended up having, and so I was a church kid. I was the organist's daughter, so prior to that, I never saw myself in any other light than this is what's normal, I'm Vernita's granddaughter, but when that moment shifted for me, I started feeling like, well, if he don't want to be around me, then nobody else wants to be around me. So then when little stuff started happening, or me being bullied at school, or maybe me and my cousin got into an argument, I started internalizing those things as is something wrong with me. That's the reason why my uncles don't spend time with me, because my dad didn't even want to be here. So it's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not pretty enough. Maybe I'm not funny. Maybe I'm annoying. Maybe I'm too dark. It will shock you, the things that your mind will take you to, especially as a preteen, and you don't have an adult way of looking at things. So it only takes that one situation or that one thing to push you into this weird way of thinking. That low self-esteem that started there, it only got bigger. It only got bigger. And at that time, I feel like there was nothing that anybody could do. There was not a hairstyle, a pair of clothes, nothing that anybody can do in that space of time that would have made me feel any better anymore. Because if you think about it, my foundational is I had everything. I had my grandma who cooked and baked pies and would take me shopping on Saturdays. And sometimes we would sneak out the house and go to the mall, even though my granddaddy said we didn't need to buy anything else. We spent our time together. She would take me to her revivals. Me and my mom would do special things together. My mom worked so hard. She would be at work at 3 o'clock in the morning, and not get off until late in the afternoon. Some days she would just take me out of school so I can go to work with her and spend quality time with her. We would travel to Canada. I didn't go without. We wasn't poor. We wasn't broke. You know what? I didn't. I wasn't exposed to domestic violence or anything like that. So for this one thing, this one person's rejection towards me, and to me, just outright disdain for me, it messed me up. It messed me up mentally. Even though at that time I still couldn't even express what it was I was feeling. Like my description of it now is coming from adult who can acknowledge certain things. Then it was just like, why he don't want me? Why would he purposely come over here on Christmas and hurt my feelings like that? Who does what adult doesn't know that that's not a very nice thing to do? How come when he called me, all he care about is what my mama got going on? How come he can never remember my age or my birthday? Or, how come everybody else, his friends, his colleagues, other preachers and stuff can always reach him, and he can go to their services but can never stop by? So at that point, it had become hard for me to keep listening to Honor Thy Father, and that I had to love him either way, and that I couldn't hate him, because in my mind I had already established that I hated this man. These stories or experiences that I've been through, I also have had these conversations with my children to where they know, like, this is where mommy started. Like, this is how come mommy can recognize certain things in you, because I've been through it. When I've seen certain things that their dad started doing, instantly I was like, let's have this conversation. When he started telling them he was going to get them, but never showing up, and they started crying, it was like replaying my childhood all over again. All over again. Just shout out to the fathers who are in their children's life, who are active. You may not be with the mom, but that child knows they can call you for anything and that they are loved by you. It makes a difference. I know people think, oh, you'll be fine, or because you can end up growing up and being successful without it. And I did pretty good for myself. Like, I'm not a horrible person, but there are little intricate parts of my life where decisions that were made based off of low self-esteem, or based off of some type of void there that was not filled, that we can trace back to those very moments. If you may not think that it affects you, maybe you didn't become promiscuous, but you have a hard time in relationships with men. You don't have trust with men. Like, it's so many things that can come from something that we experienced in our childhood, especially if you become a person like me who internalized everything as a child. And that's in that space is where I stopped saying people are doing or acting a certain way because that's who they are, and started equalizing they're doing that because it's something about me that makes them mistreat me, that makes them not want to be around me, that makes them avoid me or reject me. I started internalizing other people's actions. I took on what they did as my problem, as my fault. The love of a father is important, just as well as the love of a mother. I'm going to let y'all go on this episode. Check in for episode 9, where we're going to talk about our absent father from that Christmas up until about age 16 or 18, because it gets deeper. I know it seems small. It gets worse. In the next couple of weeks, I do got some scheduled recordings that I have to do with our upcoming guest. Episode 12, I believe it's going to be it's either episode 10 or 11. We're going to have one of my closest friends, Kia Nicole. She's going to grace us with her presence. I also have another recording coming up with Kiara Edwards. I'm so excited to have my friends on here, because sometimes I know a little bit about their background, and I'd be so proud of them. They say they're proud of me, but I'm so proud of them and what they are accomplishing and doing with their lives. So I would love for you guys to hear from them, and they can add value to the conversation. So until then, what I need y'all to do is go back, make sure y'all hit the notification bell so that whenever we are live, it will notify you that we are live. Whenever we make a post, it will notify you of that as well and send you a reminder. We're still working on some little things. Let me know if you like the new intro, because I'm working on continuing to grow. So we had one little foundation, now we're adding on and making it better. I enjoyed y'all today. Thank y'all for tuning in to this conversation of an absent father, part 1. And I will see you guys next Tuesday at the same time, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, on Facebook and YouTube for part 2. Have a blessed day and be healed.